Welcome to Original Being, where we explore the timeless wisdom of ancient practices and old ways of living, from holistic health and wellness to survival techniques, homesteading, and primitive skills. I'm Jillian and Jenn, a functional and holistic-minded physician associate and a homesteading mother of 3. I am on a quest to reconnect with the knowledge our ancestors lived by, practical skills, natural healing, and self-sufficiency in a modern world. Each episode, I'll be sharing insights, experiences, and conversations with experts and everyday people who embody this mindset. Together, we'll challenge modern conveniences, embrace hands-on learning, and rediscover the practices that have stood the test of time. Disclaimer, the information shared on this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. My opinions and those of my guests are solely our own and are not affiliated with any institutions, employers, or certifications. This podcast does not provide medical advice, and any health-related decisions should be made in consultation with your personal healthcare provider. By listening, you acknowledge that you take full responsibility for your own choices and actions.
Today on Original Being, we have Jenn Campus. Jenn is a 2-time best-selling author, an anthropologist, and an animist dedicated to helping others reconnect with the old ways. For nearly a decade, she and her husband ran a forest homestead in Vermont, raising animals and growing food in alignment with seasonal rhythms. Now living in Sardinia, her husband's ancestral homeland, Jenn weaves together the threads of folklore, animism, plant wisdom, and sacred homemaking to support a life rooted in ancestral wisdom. As an immigrant, mother to 2 neurodivergent children, and a lifelong student of myth and tradition, she brings a deeply lived perspective on how our differences are actually ancient gifts, passed down through our bloodlines to help us thrive. I've followed Jenn on Instagram for a very long time, and I'm super excited to have her on the podcast today. You're one of my Instagram idols. So I think we're going to have a great conversation today. How are you?
I'm good. And thank you so much for inviting me to be on. I'm really, really honored to be here and super excited to have a nice conversation today.
Yeah. And you're joining all the way from Sardinia. What time is it there?
It's 2:15 almost.
Okay. So, it's like 8 a.m. here. So
yeah. So we're afternoon, you're morning.
Yep. Well, I wanted to talk about where you started with everything. So you have a degree in anthropology is it from Hampshire College?
Yes.
And I went to UMass Amherst undergrad, so same area.
Oh my God, the 5 college system.
I know, right?
Yeah.
So what led you to study anthropology in the first place? Because quite frankly, I'm jealous these days. I'm like, wow, I really should have been an anthropologist. That is like where all of my interests are. But I didn't have that wherewithal at 18 years old.
Yeah, it was kind of not like necessarily something that I thought I was going to get into either. I kind of started out with child psychology, actually. And oddly enough, was studying this child psychologist called Vygotsky, who talked about how culture is a very important influence on how like children evolve over their lifetime. And so that really excited me a lot, thinking about culture and how culture influences people and sort of like their journey, because I am adopted and I grew up not knowing anything about, my biological origins. Mm-hmm. And so I was always questioning this nature versus nurture, which one is stronger, which one has more influence. And so I think that just sort of led me on this path of trying to understand how culture does play a big role in our lives. And I think it was also coming from a place where I was like very interested in Native American history and indigenous studies. Mm-hmm. And I was really intrigued and passionate about learning about cultures where there was still like this intact system for being a part of nature and seeing yourself as part of like the web of life, and, having reverence for ancestors and the spirit world, and just these things that I felt like we just didn't have in modern Western culture, and somehow knowing that we could get it back and that we probably had it before and we could get it back. And so I kind of just was on this track of like, how do I do that? How do I find those answers?
Yeah. And Hampshire is a very interesting college. Were they kind of like letting you shape what you studied in your major in that way?
Yeah, pretty much. Like it's really project based. So kind of like the first year you're getting all your basics done, but it's still very like project and essays. There's no tests. There's no final exams. It's all like written work and projects, which I really loved. So you could kind of take whatever was like the root of the thing that you loved and find different ways of expressing it, which also I think is really awesome and probably very much influences the way that I go about doing my work now too, because I like to see things through a lot of different lenses and like, how can I take this one thing and sort of, put different lenses on it to get a deeper understanding for what lies there.
Mm-hmm. And so are you from Massachusetts?
No, I'm originally from the mid-Atlantic state. So I was born in Pennsylvania. Okay. I grew up the first 8 years in Delaware, then went all the way through high school in Maryland. So
okay,
I'm a mid-Atlantic girl, but really just loved New England and like was so excited to go to school there and then stayed there until we moved to Italy. So I lived in Massachusetts for a while, lived in Vermont for a while, but just really loved the New England states.
Yeah. I have lived in New England my whole life, but I've lived in every state except Connecticut. So I feel like I have a good understanding of all the different New England states and what they represent. But the Western Mass is a really cool area. Yeah. I always said if it was closer to the ocean, I probably never would have left. I'm an ocean person, so I really needed to get closer to the sea.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It was hard to get there.
So you met your husband and then you had this homestead in Vermont. And what led to the move to Sardinia, which it's been about 5 years, correct, that you've lived in Sardinia now?
It's been 5. Yeah, it's been 5 official years in Sardinia. It's 7 years since we left Vermont. So we spent about 9 months in Sardinia when we first got here. Then my husband got a job in Brussels, Belgium. And so we were there for almost 2 years. And then we came back, which was wonderful and what we had wanted to do anyway. But what kind of led us here was we had a business that we had for like 8 years. It was in the food space where we were doing, working a lot with food bloggers and advertisers in the food space because I used to be a cookbook author, recipe developer.
Oh my gosh, so cool.
That was like my last career. And still something I love to talk about and do and cook and things. But it was like a time in the market where things were changing. And so our like revenue resources like were changing. And so we needed to pivot the business and we got investors, but they wanted to change things in a way that we were not comfortable with. And so we kind of had to make this big decision about whether continuing with them or just like letting the company go. And ultimately we decided to let the company go because it just wasn't anything that we felt like was part of who we were at that time. And so it led to like us going bankrupt and we lost our house and the homestead and the whole thing. But it was also like a moment where it was very freeing in some ways because it's a time to just completely reevaluate your life. Yeah. And at that point, our daughter was about 4 years old and my son was a newborn. And we were like, we love Vermont. We've loved our life here, but we don't have any ties to Vermont. Like, we're just here because we like it and because we could afford a really awesome place and do the homesteading thing that we wanted to do. But, our roots are not here. And, my husband is Sardinian. He lived here on the island until he was about 5. Then his parents left to go to Rome for work. And so he grew up in Rome. And in his mind, he always wanted to come back here to live. And so we were like, you know what? Let's do it. Let's do it, because I had been to Sardinia twice before we moved. And the last time we were here, my daughter was 8 months old. And I remember the last night that we were watching the sunset over the sea, and I heard this voice, and it said, "Please bring my children home." And I felt like it was like a call from the island to come back. And so I was like, we got to make this happen. And so when everything happened with the business and the house and everything, it just felt like everything was conspiring to make this a decision that was kind of a no-brainer. And so that's kind of what brought us here in the end.
Oh, the timing was right.
The timing was totally right.
That's kind of how I feel about moving to Maine, which I know is way smaller scale. Moving to another country is not the same. But for our family and friends, it seemed very dramatic because, we were in the suburbs and had an established life there. And I was like, no, I need to be closer to nature. And I just felt this pull for so many years to move up here and have land. And just to it just kept being like, Maine, I have to go. Like I just had that same feeling. And I haven't regretted it. Like it was absolutely the right thing to do. It was the right decision. And I think that sometimes that timing, everything just kind of perfectly works out.
Totally.
So your husband already spoke Italian? Oh, and that's, but there are different dialects in Sardinia, quite like Sicily. Is that also correct?
Yeah, there's actually, I don't know, I think there's about 5 official languages in Sardinia. There's different dialects of Sardinian, depending on the region. There's also people that speak Spanish because there was like an area that was colonized by Spain for a really long time. Actually, the whole island was colonized by Spain for a long time, but there was like an area that they were there for the longest. And so they still speak Spanish there. And I think they also speak a dialect of Genovese in a certain part because, again, of the colonization from the north of Italy and its influence in Sardinia. So it's definitely very linguistically diverse for sure. But most people, I mean, everybody does speak standard Italian. And that is what I'm learning just because it makes the most sense. If I were to try to learn the Sardinian dialect that is in the town where we live, even that is hard because the town is literally divided by this line where they speak one dialect on one side and another dialect on the other side. And then it's a different dialect from the dialect that my mother-in-law speaks because she's from further north. So it's like, we'll just stick with the basic Italian. My kids are learning some Sardinian from just being with kids in school and stuff. But it's and then my husband grew up in Rome, so he speaks like the Roman dialect, and so does my father-in-law. So it's like we're just a mess. We're a mess.
Well, your children are going to have some amazing language skills.
Yeah.
Is their school taught in English or Italian?
It's Italian because it's an Italian school. We live in a small village with like about 2,000 people, so it's very much like. It's very much like going back in time, probably about 3 to 4 decades, I would say, from what it was like and what it's like in the U.S. It's kind of like it feels more like my childhood time than what children in the U.S. are experiencing now, which is one of the things that I love about living here is that my kids get to have. Still, they get to have a real childhood. There's kids that are my daughter's age that, are walking around town together after school and they go and they get, they go to the bar and they get their sodas and they hang out and they walk around the piazza and they can do that because it's, it's still safe enough to let kids be kids and not have to sort of be watching them and be so intense about it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So is it just safer there in general?
Yeah, I would say so. It's very much like a traditional Sardinian village. People here are still like, pretty religious. It is a Catholic, Italy's a Catholic country. Sardinia is still very much Catholic. However, it is interesting because Sardinia does have over like 10,000 megalithic archaeological sites. So when people think of like megaliths and standing stones and stone circles, they think of like, Scotland, Ireland, England, France. But actually Sardinia has more than any of those places.
Wow. That's so amazing.
So like people are really comfortable here with the fact that there is like a clear pagan past here, and people are like, oh, they're really proud of that because it's so unique to Sardinia. Like the various ways that they built the different megaliths are very Sardinian. So yeah, so it's like really an interesting kind of mix, because although people are like very traditional Catholic, they go to church on Sundays, there's still a lot of like pre-Christian history that people are very attached to, and it comes out a lot in in events like Carnevale, for example, Carnival, like in Carnival, for people that have only heard about Mardi Gras, for example, Carnival is actually a month-long public, I call it like a month-long public ritual, because that's exactly what it is, where, you know, there's different parades and there's like events and there's bonfires that all have like really different important meanings culturally. And here in Sardinia, they use a lot of the traditional Sardinian masks, which are very old and ancient, from like thousands of years ago. Hand-carved wooden masks of animals,
so cool.
and all kinds of stuff. So like it's still like really resonant in the culture, which I find wonderful.
Yeah, I love that. So are the monuments, were they like ancient Greek? Like I know in Sicily it was really Greece for a long, long time. So where are they coming from?
It's from the ancient Sardinian people, because there was it's called the neurodivergent culture. So it's like the culture from 2,000 and 3,000 years ago, which was basically a culture of the first Sardinians, which basically they worshipped water and cows and built these like amazing towers where, you know, I think it's really fascinating to see that they're made of like they're built on these really high hilltops. They're made with gigantic rocks that people just still have no idea how they even got them up there, because it doesn't make any sense at all. And the parts of the buildings are the ones that have the biggest rocks. So as technology started to happen, the rocks actually got smaller, whereas the really old ancient parts of the buildings are like these enormous things that I don't even know how they could do it today with what we have.
Wow.
So it's it's just basically the ancient Sardinian people who have always been here, I guess, from recorded history of what we know. And some of that then it evolved with the Phoenicians, because the Phoenicians were the ones who came here first, kind of, and started to build along the coastlines, because Sardinia, even though it's an island, is a very insular kind of place. So it's like everything really traditional is inland. It's in the mountains. Whereas like on the coastlines, they've known for, you know, thousands of years that on the coast, that's where the invaders come. So we're not going to put our important stuff there. We're going to let that kind of be like, whatever happens, happens. And we're going to keep all of our really important stuff inside and defendable. And that's kind of how it's always been.
Wow, that's really neat. So I'm curious how the Sardinians have responded to you moving there, or your family moving there. You know, how do they take like Americans coming into the country? And maybe it's different because your husband really did come from there, but what's been the response?
It's interesting. It's like I kind of refer to myself as like a curiosity more than a community member, because people seem like very interested in you. They want to know you. They want to talk to you when you first arrive, because like you're different and it's just cool. And they want to know why in the world. I mean, because that's the question I get the most is like, why would you come and live here in this little village? And it's like, no, you don't understand. This is amazing. This is y'all are lucky, because this is the prize, you know? And so, yeah, I mean, it has been a lot different than what I expected, because I guess how I experienced it and how we experienced it when we came to visit. And even if it was for extended periods of time, because we would come here maybe and stay for like a month, 2 months, 6 weeks, back when our children were really young, stay with family. And it just seemed like this amazing fairy tale. Everybody was like so nice and, yeah, you need to come back. Yeah, you should definitely come and live here. And it's not that people are not welcoming. It's just that they're like already set, you know, everybody is related to everybody else. They all grew up together. You know, it's like I always say, the social circles are not formed, they're inherited. It's like you have your cousins, you have your siblings, you have your aunts and uncles and your grandparents. And so, you know, after like the novelty wears off, it's not like they really need you to like socialize and feel like, oh, I want to make a friend. You know, it's not really like that.
They're not bringing like really new people in.
Yeah. So it's kind of, which, you know, I also really, that's one of the things that makes it hard, but it's also one of the things that I really love about this place is because it just is. Like it's not because they're not welcoming or the place is not welcoming. It just is. And it's as it always has been. And I hope that it will stay this way for a long time to come because it is rare in this world and it is a good thing. And I am happy that the people here, you know, have the kind of connections that they have, the kind of ties that they have. And I think it's a really, really nice thing. And I think, too, that my kids, when they're older, they will feel like they are part of this place. They will belong in a way that I won't ever, that my husband kind of does, but then, you know, he grew up in Rome, so he doesn't have the typical Sardinian accent. He speaks in a different way, so they already know that he's an outsider. He lived in the US for like 25 years. When we first came back, people would always be like, wow, you speak really good Italian, you know, like, how long have you been? He's like, I'm Sardinian. I was born in Sassari. You know, they're like, wait, what? Because you have kind of an American accent, like, you know, and so he and I in different ways have been really like this thing of belonging has come up in different ways for us, but also always kind of a challenge. But I think the whole goal that we had set out when we came here, I think is still achievable, which was that we want to do this for our kids. And I think that the kids are definitely going to feel like this is home. And they're making the connections now that all the people that are my age in this town made when they were their age and still have those connections. So I think even though sometimes it feels a little bit isolating and sometimes it feels a little bit difficult, at the same time, I'm really glad because I feel like they are always going to have people that have their back.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask was, once you're part of that community, is everyone just sort of helping and watching out for each other? Is that something you feel like they have there that we have lost in a lot of places in the U.S.? Yes,
I think to a degree that is true. But I also think that this idea of community that people are talking a lot about in the U.S., and especially when they're talking about places in Europe and places like Italy and small village life, that it's a bit romanticized, to be honest, and that a lot of the people who are talking about that are talking from their own experience, which is totally wonderful, and they should keep talking about it. But they're not usually people who are like living full-time year-round in a small village where they're not from.
Yeah.
And it's just, it makes me, you know, it kind of makes me think about mythology and fairy tales and stories and sort of like, you know, the old wise woman who lived on the edge of the village that sort of like people were really curious about, but also kind of scared of, but also like was valuable to the people sometimes when they needed her wisdom, and then like kind of ignored when the wisdom was not needed. That's kind of like the archetype that I'm sort of like
that's
really resonating with right now. Because everybody knows I'm like weird. My daughter's always like, "Mommy, I think we're the weird family in Monty." And I was like, yeah, I mean, we probably are like the weird family. You know, you have like an American mom, and you know, it's just I write books, and everybody else after school, all the moms go and they go to the bar and drink coffee and smoke cigarettes all day. I don't do that, you know. So it's just like, yeah, we are the weird people, but it's a good kind of weird, and it's opening it's opening space, I think, in people's minds to begin to possibly accept some small change and the influence of outsiders a little bit more.
So I do think a lot of Americans romanticize moving away. And you have to think, what are we looking for? You know, is it that slower way of living? Is it that idealistic viewpoint that there's going to be this little village like the movies where, you know, you are weird, but then you do get accepted and then it's this like lovely way of life. I think there's something to be said for the old architecture and the ancient structures too, because we certainly don't have that here. But what is it that's drawing us away and making us think that this is this idealistic way of living?
I think that is a many-fold answer depending on like how deep you want to go with it, because I feel like on one level it is because the grass is always greener on the other side, right? I think that life has gotten too fast in the US, and that there is just too much pressure on people, and they're really looking for a way to have a better balance, which I think you can definitely find here. If you can find work that allows you to, like my husband, you know, he lived for 20 years in the US and worked, and he was like, I might get paid less here, but since I work for European company, I get vacation, I have like time off with my family. So there is like definitely like a better life work balance, that if you can get work in the country that you are moving to, it is much, much better for that. But I also think I think there is a deeper layer to all of this, actually, especially for people of like European descended ancestry, that there is just always going to be this pull, whether you want to say it's like in our DNA, in our blood, in our spirit, whatever it is, we're still linked to European lands. And I know it's like a big thing. I don't know, like if you're familiar with it, but I feel like in my circles on social media, I'm always seeing both sides of it, where it's like Americans trying to defend their hyphenated ethnicities of Italian American, Irish American, French American, whatever. And then those, you know, Italian, French, German, Europeans still in Europe being like, what are you even talking about?
You're not one of us.
What are you even talking about? And not only getting like mad about it, but then people saying like, oh, I just love Europe so much. And, you know, Europeans being like, you know, Europe is a continent and not a country. And although all of that is true, and I believe that all of these things can be true at the same time, I don't think it's naivety on the part of the Americans saying that they love going to Europe, because so many of us have ties and ancestral roots in various countries. We don't all have one place where we come from. You know, we have multiple places where we come from. And I believe that land has its own energy, and like continents do. So like this idea of countries is, you know, it's a political thing. It doesn't actually have anything to do with ethnicity. Nationality and ethnicity are not the same thing. And so land masses don't necessarily know that they're divided in a certain way either. And so I think that there's way more nuance to this conversation that is really hard to pin down, just because we feel a longing, we feel this grief, but we don't really know how to name it, and we don't really know why we're having it. And then we feel like we're wrong for having it, because if we get the chance to come and we know where our ancestral homelands are, and we come like with this reverence and this sort of like, oh, I'm going on this ancestral pilgrimage, and I'm feeling like so much gratitude for being here. And then like we start talking to people and they're like, you're American, just stop.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking because they don't know. I mean, they're right in their own experience and their own worldview, but they're not correct, because when you think about the long arc of of European descended Americans, like our people, our ancestors lived in Europe for millennia. Whereas they have lived in the United States, or what is known as the United States, for 4 or 5 generations. I mean, are we really just American and nothing else?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm really excited that you brought this up because this is something I think about all the time. I think a lot of this has influenced the state of America right now because everybody wants to belong. Humans are dying for belonging. They want to be part of a group. They want to be part of like-minded people. And they want to have an identity. So Americans now they're like pushed in these two directions. And one side is saying like, nobody's American except for indigenous Americans, you know, and then the other side saying, I'm so American and no one else is allowed to come here and be American anymore. And then in the middle is where most of us fall. And there's this, like, well, I have these ancestors that came here only a couple of generations ago. And then I have these ancestors that came here many, many generations ago. And where do we fit anymore in this? And you're just dying for belonging, connection, and to identify with something. And then you're right. We end up lost. And so you either are struggling to connect with people who are still saying that you're not enough of some kind of a culture, or you have to embrace just being American right now, which is fine too. I think like, of course, I live here. My parents lived here. My grandparents lived here. Probably not going anywhere anytime soon because mostly a lot of us because we can't, even if we wanted to. Right. And then, like you said, even if we did, maybe we're not going to belong there and we don't fit in there anymore. So what is the answer? You know, how, and I think that ties beautifully into your work because how do we draw on our ancestors and place and find that sense of belonging, combining those two things?
Yeah. And I think, you know, if you're asking me the question, you know, my answer would come from the land, that it always goes back to the land and that you can find a sense of belonging to the land. That is the place. And I think that is actually the most important part of belonging. Is knowing the land where you live, whether that is, you know, where everybody has always lived in your family or whether you're a newcomer. It's that sort of getting into a better relationship with that land, acknowledging it as a living entity that holds a lot of history, that holds, you know, the bones of our ancestors, whether they have only been here for a few generations or for thousands of years. And, you know, really seeing the land where we live as the embodiment of all of these things, all of like the hopes and dreams of everyone that came before us to belong, you know, and that now does belong to the earth because their bodies are literally have become part of it, as we will one day become part of it as well. And so I think there's more about community and belonging than just with humans. And I think that that's where where there's an invitation to look beyond this place of feeling like you're just never gonna be fitting in anywhere, and seeing what you really do fit in with where you are. It could be a tree. It could be some flowers. It could be your dog. I mean, really. And I don't mean that like in a joking sort of sense, because that is one thing that I have learned so much on my journey as a mother. You know, I have like 2 neurodivergent kids that I'm raising. My daughter is autistic. My son has really severe ADHD. I've been being told for most of my daughter's life that she needs to socialize. She has to go to school. She needs to make friends. She's, you know, she needs to do this. She needs to do that. And then I see her with our cats or her favorite rock or like this place, you know, on the land where she likes to go when she needs to think. And I'm like, why is that not considered community? Why are those things not her community or her socialization? You know, she I mean, she is verbal, obviously, but she has moments where she's not. She has what they call like selective mutism or whatever. But so I've had to learn a lot about nonverbal communication by being her mom. And I'm like, there are other ways to communicate, and there's other ways to form community and to socialize. It doesn't always have to be with humans and in the way that we typically see things. And that's really been a huge learning curve for me. And at the same time, a huge gift, because that's part of what has helped me get through the struggles of being here, being a stranger in a strange land, and being like, yes, but all those years ago, that the island really did ask me to come and live here. She did ask me to, and she's always provided for me. She's always been here for me. She's always accepted me. She's always, taken my tears and turned them into something good. And is that less important than having, a group of girls that I go hang out with on Friday nights? To me, maybe that falls a little bit short now.
Yeah. And like connecting, this all makes me think of going inward instead of expanding out. So this has been something on my mind a lot lately, is like the world is getting bigger and scarier in some ways, but really it's just that we have way too much information, way too much coming at us at all times. We know every horrible thing that's happening at all moments on a little device in our hands. And that's way too much for our nervous systems to handle. And so like, even if you're not feeling that connection to local humans, like you were saying, but moving inward to like, what's your home base and what are the plants around you, and becoming intricately connected to the nature that is surrounding you. There's something so grounding and peaceful in that. That can be a practice in and of itself to feel that connection.
Yes. I saw on Instagram, someone that I follow was talking about how people are always saying you need to like step out of your comfort zone. And she was talking about expanding your comfort zone. So like, how do you expand your comfort zone, or how do you expand community, your idea of what community is, to sort of meet yourself where you are, meet yourself with some grace, and saying like, there's nothing wrong with you because maybe you're not making the type of connections that you feel like you're supposed to be making, but that doesn't mean that connections aren't being made. I mean, there's like the whole, ancestors that are also available to us. That's like a whole thing we haven't even talked about, in what are like the connections that we have in other realms, because they too exist and those too can be tapped into. And so I think it's really just about, again, it's the lenses, and like changing the lens to see something in a different way and to see something from another perspective. And then you realize, oh, I guess maybe there wasn't that much missing as I thought there was.
So, a lot of people talk about ancestor work these days, and I know that can be a really deep dive, but how do you personally connect with your ancestors? And I know you're adopted, so did that change sort of how you've done that? Do you connect with adoptive ancestors and biological ancestors?
I do definitely do that. I guess a lot of my ancestral healing work that I've done over the past, like say 7 or 8 years, has been focused on my birth family, just because there was a lot there that I was not aware of until I was aware of it. And seeing how there were certain patterns that had gone on some lineages that I had noticed happening for me in my own life, and needing to attend to those things. And also just trying to understand myself better, because, again, it goes back to the whole nature and nurture. And I think, both definitely play a role. But it was like a lot of trying to understand myself in the ways that I couldn't see myself in the family that I grew up in.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, my ancestors have played a very, very important part in my life, because as I mentioned, with my kids and especially my daughter, it took us pretty much, I would say, like 8 years to get a diagnosis for her, especially here because it is a little bit behind the times in terms of neurodivergence. And there were times when we had no support and we did not have anybody that understood what was going on. And she was not getting any support. And it was really, really difficult. And so I don't know how it happened, but one day I just like literally put the call out to my ancestors and I was like, what do I do?
Yeah.
What do I do? Because I don't know. Like, there is no one to help me and I don't know what to do. And they were just like, I mean, they gave me so many practical tools, which, you know, some listeners might think that this is crazy stuff, but it's true. Because basically what they were trying to explain to me is like, it's all inside of you. Like, you have all of those answers because she comes from you. And there's like a long line of us. But like all of that wisdom and knowledge is like stored in parts of you. You just have to like find ways to like release it so that you can have access to it. And it basically came down to, for me, which is like all of these behaviors and traits that are being described as like difficult, challenging. Oh, we need to like work on this. We need to work on that. They said, try to understand where this quality or this trait might have been useful in the past. Because we don't come into the world with traits and behaviors that are useless. We don't. Mm-hmm. Everything and every trait that we have as an individual human being is something that has been finely tuned and passed down generation after generation, tuning it even finer and finer and finer until it comes to us as a gift to help us thrive. It's not something we need to get rid of. It's not something we need to behaviorize out of us. It's something we need to understand what it is at its core and how, like I always joke about my daughter, how to use her powers for good.
Yeah.
You know, because these are gifts. These are not like random things. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that our society and modern Western culture is like so regimented these days. Everybody has to go to school and work. Everybody's got to be in a building from 9 to 5. Everybody's got to get up in the morning and they got to go to sleep at night and they have to eat these meals at these times a day. And people are not, we did not evolve in this way at all. And so there's some of us, and it seems like growing numbers of people are coming forth and saying that they are some of these people who just cannot fit into that paradigm.
Yep.
And that's good because I believe that it's these very children who are seen as kids that need help and they need their behaviors to be changed and whatever. No, the way that they think is what we need so desperately in this world to fix this giant mess that we have made and created for ourselves. They're the minds that are going to help us as humans in general, not us, not me and you probably, but human beings to get right again with who we are, what we're here for, what we are meant to be doing. And that's what we need. So, you know, when you have your coworker who can't look you in the eye, or, you know, they're not like a bad team member. They're just somebody who is like really struggling and doing an awesome job, actually, if they're working with you in a building somewhere, you know, to do what they're supposed to do in this society. But really, their gifts were probably meant for something else at a time in the past. And so my ancestors were basically like, you just need to get curious about this. You need to remain curious because this is going to help not only your daughter to feel like, you know, she is a whole human being and that there's nothing wrong with her, but it's also going to help you because she's going to be your greatest teacher. Mm-hmm. She's going to show you how to get right with yourself again and to break these patterns that have been, you know, plaguing your lineages for years. Like she is the one that's going to help you to sort of start to make the shift.
Yes. Our kids teach us so much.
It's
I think sometimes
crazy.
They purposely are like not what we wanted, but what we needed. Like just, very challenging. And also that we sometimes see aspects of ourselves reflected back to us that we don't necessarily like, or that society taught us were not good, features or traits or behaviors. And then that's really hard. And then that's something we have to learn. And then, like you said, to reframe the whole thing, to think, wow, this is a person, totally separate individual from me. We don't own our children, bring them into the world, but they are their own people. And that they have gifts as an individual, and how can we help them see that and not come at them from that same like societal perspective that was kind of pushed on us and that is being reflected. It's really hard. I'm doing a lot of like unlearning for myself, because that capitalist mindset was really deeply embedded in me, of like high achieving, like, well, of course you're going to go to college, and of course you're going to get a graduate degree, and then always feeling like, well, I didn't become a doctor, so I was never enough, which, doesn't necessarily come from my parents on purpose, but like that was just there. And it was just sort of like really pushed forward. And now looking at it, being like, all I want to do is like pull backwards and like, and obviously that's privilege too, because of course people have to make money and people, need to do things. And I do think that I wanted to be a healer, and I always wanted to help other people, which is what that sort of, naturally I was always going to go into medicine in some way. But that is still so ingrained in me that as I look at my children and my expectations for them, and I have to try to like pause and like be mindful of it and stop it because it's so deep in there. And I think that goes for, like you're saying, like these different things that really, really sensitive children, or certain behaviors like, and not just for autism, but say like sensitivity to noise or different things that people often see that as a negative, because we want this like toughness, and we need people like that. We need balance. We need people of all types. And what can they show us? What can they show us that maybe we had forgotten or we are just not paying attention to anymore?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's another thing that I just really love. Somehow this is like a continuation of that thought, but it may sound totally out of sync. But, it's another thing that I love about living in Italy is, and especially here in Sardinia, is like, there is not all of those expectations on people, because people still work like, what you would call like normal jobs, like blue collar jobs. And they're fine. They can buy a house, they can have a car, they can do all the things that, you need to do in life. People don't look down upon them because they drive a truck, and do whatever. It's not like, not everybody goes to higher education here. It's just not a thing at all.
Yep.
And I really am like so grateful that I don't have that to look forward to, because I have some friends now whose kids are like either just starting college or are going through the college process. And it's like so stressful.
Yeah.
Not only financially, but, there's like this whole thing in the US now about like the college experience. Like the kids are supposed to have like this college experience, which basically to me just sounds like a bunch of partying, drinking. And I'm just like, okay, no, like I am so glad that is not going to be anything that my kids have to worry about. Like they don't have to even think about, if they want to go, great. If they don't want to go, it's not going to, make their lives impossible. They'll be able to find work and do apprenticeships or do whatever they need to do to make a living for themselves. So that is just like one of the good things. So, it's the balance thing, right? It's like not everything is perfect. And I think that's just so individual. Whatever people decide are like the most important things that they want from their life and their lifestyle, and just to, accept the fact that if you get those things that you really want that are like super important to you, there's also going to be downsides to it. And that's just life. It's not, I don't think life is meant to be easy. Life, we're here to grow and we're here to learn. and we're here to stay curious and interested. I find it really disheartening, actually, just seeing a lot of the social culture in the US now where it's so divisive because everybody seems like they know everything about everything. And if you don't agree with them, then you're like the most evil human being that ever walked the face. It's like, what has happened? Because that's not like, what happened to like not being sure or like changing your mind later once new information comes to light and then saying like, wow, I used to think this and now I think this, and maybe I'll think something different in a couple of months depending on, you know, new information that comes out. And I'm just really kind of like surprised, like shocked actually, like more than surprised with sort of the vehemence of people and their beliefs now. It's like really strange.
I completely agree. All the time I think everything is not black and white, it is gray, and everybody is like on these polar extremes, and there's just no like veering from it, you know. And they stick to it even if evidence tells you otherwise. It's like, well, now I can't be wrong, so I'm going to stick with that no matter what. And like it's kind of mind-blowing to me because I always try to question things and like come from a like, well, let's look into that and let's read about it. And is this right? Is this wrong? You know, if I have a belief and then you question it or something I see questions it, I'm going to research and read about it and like try to figure it out. I just feel like there has to be this open-mindedness and not this like rigid stuckness.
Yeah. It's like, wow, just really, I don't know. Like, I don't know what to do with that because it's really sad to see. And that's why, like, in everything that I do now, I'm always trying to say or write or whatever. It's like, just keep being curious, keep asking questions, keep being okay with not knowing the answers to things and maybe never knowing the answers to things. It's okay. It's okay. We're not supposed to know everything, you know? It's not, that's not, and we're not supposed to necessarily have like our own really strong opinion about every single thing in the world because we're not even like wired to know all of the stuff that we know, let alone research them all so that we really understand like all of the things that go into it and then have like a really strong opinion about it. And then let everybody know what our really strong opinion of it is and like make sure that they also have that opinion. It's just, wow, guys, it's a lot of work. That's
a really good point. Yeah. Why is it so important that other people agree with us? I think that does go back to that belonging thing. You know, people want validation and justification. So, you know, validation for what their beliefs are and then justification for their actions. And when other people kind of jump on that bandwagon, it gives that feeling and everyone's looking for that. And social media has become the catalyst and the platform for it.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to just branch off a little bit, and everything's connected. So really, we're not branching much at all.
Yeah.
But I don't think all of my listeners know what animism is. And if you want to touch on what the definition of animism is, I'd really like to start to discuss that a little bit.
Okay. So animism is basically an overarching belief that everything has a spirit. So, you know, I think it's easy for people to understand that, you know, human beings have a spirit, probably animals have a spirit, maybe even a tree has a spirit because it moves, you know, moving things are spirits. But it also has the belief that, like this chair that I'm sitting on has a spirit. And I think that that really came from, and I could be wrong, but I do believe that it comes from the fact that most things were made of living things when this belief was pretty much, it was like the belief that pretty much every culture had in the beginning, right? This is like
every ancient culture, like practiced animism.
Yes, it's like a very common thing. And I think that it came from being intricately knitted into the web of life where you were, and like needing to work with nature, not against nurture for survival. So it came from like, you know, an interdependence with the natural world, which led to this belief. And so it has remained. And I think that it is becoming something that a lot of more people are identifying with and identifying themselves as a way to try to kind of come back to that way of seeing ourselves as part of nature. I always like to say we're the only animal that forgot that we're an animal. Mm-hmm. And I think animism is one of the ways that can help us remember that we are and how important that is, actually.
Well, what's so beautiful about it, like you just said, is that if we think back to older times, everything was made from a living thing because it was either an animal skin or it was wood that came from a tree or plant fibers. So things were made knowing that a life of something was taken to make it and that spirit was still like imbued in the product. We don't always think that way anymore because we have plastic and we have all these like fast polyester, fast fashion, fast things. We're consumers. We take and chuck and buy a new one. And so this is another theme I'm finding coming up a lot in the podcast too, because I've interviewed Hyde Tanner and like, people that are making things and primitive skills. When you have something that and are conscious of, a life was taken to make it, and then you are like honoring the spirit of that product. And then when you use that thing, number one, you're going to just be like, wow, like every time you use it, it's going to feel different. It's going to feel special. And you are not going to be as likely to discard it and get another one because It took time, it took energy, and it's special. And you're acknowledging the lives and the effort that went into that product. This is something I think we need to bring back a lot in our daily life.
I agree both on like making the choices, if we can, to choose things that are made from natural materials. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. And the other way of looking at it, because I know that that's not necessarily possible for everyone, because usually those things are a lot more expensive because of the amount of labor and really the sacrifice that was given for that thing to exist. But even things that are made from plastic, the way I look at that is sort of, well, then let's look at all the hands that touched it. Let's look at who came up with the idea to make this thing. Why did they want to do that? To help people, like to make people's lives easier. Probably that's how most products, come into the world, I guess. That's maybe not 100% true, but that's a whole other like wormhole that we could just dive into. But let's just say on the premise, that there's reasons why people make a product to begin with. And there's, figuring out how they're going to make it, and then having actually the hands touching machines or the minds touching machines that make the product. So like there is still a lot of spirit that can even reside in something that is made of plastic, for example. And I think like when we start to think about that also is a nice way to sort of put a different perspective on something. And know that a lot of times in ancient cultures, even ritual tools that people had, it was always said that you had to inspirit the tool as well to like attune it to whatever you wanted to use it for. So people would like anoint their ritual tools with oils, or they would use incense and smoke, or they would whisper prayers or whatever it was. We can do that as well with anything that we have, even if it's, something like that we just kind of think is one of these disposable items. We can actually ascribe more meaning to them, thank them for the help that they give, even if it is something that we throw away, wish it well on its way. I mean, it kind of sounds a little bit cheesy maybe sometimes, to talk about doing things like that. But I find that when you do, it helps you really to appreciate things more. And maybe, you decide to use a plastic Ziploc bag, like until there's holes in it, because you have, decided to give respect to something
Yeah.
That usually is just thrown in the garbage and is wasted. And I think that's just like another way that we can get closer to the way that our ancestors might have thought about things.
Yeah, exactly. And, obviously we're trying to move away from plastic, I think, as much as possible, because we're thinking these things would always like biodegrade too. Everything was just this like cycle. So kind of keeps us stuck. And I think about where we live, there's a huge bottle dump behind our house, because in Maine, that's what people used to do. They would just, I think Vermont, they probably did too at some point, like where they would just throw all their bottles in the woods. And there's other, trash, like metal and different things. And it's my dream to someday hopefully clear that out. But I think about this building up of trash, and at least the glass isn't going to necessarily biodegrade per se, but it will eventually, it would crack down into powder. But that when we're not living in the cycles of nature and with these products that were made from natural products, we're just building up trash on the planet. And how is that influencing us too? Like I don't know, everything, it's all connected in our everyday life. So the more I start to look at this stuff and try to change my everyday environment and what I'm purchasing and what I'm being really mindful of, what I'm bringing in and the things around me, the more I am caring about those things. And maybe they do cost more money, like you were saying, but then that's another reason that you're also like, okay, now I'm not just going to throw this out and replace it because it was expensive and it was something I carefully chose. And now I'm going to take better care of this too.
Yeah. Yeah. And it lasts longer anyway, just because it's like better made.
So something else is, I think that kids have a more natural sense of animism than adults. I don't know if you've noticed this too. Recently, one of our cars got hit by another car and the front got smushed in. And my daughter was so upset about it and was like hugging the car. Like when I brought it home, because you still could drive it, just the front was like smushed in. So I brought it home and she was so sad and she was crying and she was like hugging the front of the car. And I was like, like, I don't see that. Like, I don't really, I guess you kind of do see your car, I guess, is you have them for such a long time. Usually they start to become a being and part of your family, but I didn't have that feeling towards it. And she really did. And then she was so upset that it ended up being totaled. So we had to get a new car. She was really upset. And that made me really think about that, that kids almost naturally are seeing a being in items.
Yeah. That's so sweet. Aww.
She does that with other stuff too, though. And maybe it's just her, I don't know. Maybe I think she is a little bit more like that, maybe a little bit more intuitive with things. But do you think that too, that kids naturally come to animism?
I think so too. I think they do. I mean, when you were talking about the thing with your daughter in the car, I was thinking about something that happened with my daughter a couple of years ago. We were like, I don't know, we were in Rome and we had gotten gelato and she couldn't finish it. And I was like, well, okay, then just throw it in the trash. No, I can't throw it in the trash. I was like, well, if you're not going to eat it, I mean, it was like a hot day. It was like running down her hands, Mommy, I'm sticky. I'm like, just throw it away. No, I can't. And so, we're like in a busy street. I didn't want her to have a meltdown. This was like back in the days when we didn't exactly know what was going on. And she was like very prone to having meltdowns in public spaces. And I was like, I can't have another one of these. So I just like took the ice cream and I threw it in the garbage can. This kid wailed her little heart out. And when I finally got to like, what is going on? Like, why are you so upset about this? She was like, because Mommy, it didn't live to its potential. And she was like 6. She was like, it's meant to be enjoyed. Gelato is meant to be enjoyed. And then we just threw it in the garbage like it didn't matter. And I was like, oh, crap. You're actually so right. And I'm really sorry. And let's just let's say that we're sorry to the gelato, but I think it will understand the fact that you just couldn't eat it anymore and it was a hot day and it was making you sticky and it was going to make you crazy. So I think, let's just we can say we're sorry to the gelato, but maybe like a bird will come and take the cone, or maybe a mouse will come and lick, or the ants will eat it up. Like it's not going to go to waste. It'll be okay. And that seemed to make her feel better. But I was just like, wow, it didn't live to its potential. Like, where did that even come from? Like, that was like one of those out of the mouth of babes things. It was like, how do you even know the word potential? Like, So yeah, I do think that they have just like a deeper sense, because when you think about too, like kids with stuffed animals, right? Like my son has his babies. It keeps growing. There's like 9 babies now, and they all have to be in the bed, and we all have to say goodnight to them. And like, you know, we have to do all of these things. And it's great because I think, to me, like I encourage it because I'm thinking to myself, yes, you know, this is like something that I want them to continue to do in their life with other things as they grow up. And I want them to see things as important and deserving of respect. And so, yeah, I really do think that they have a natural sort of affinity to that.
And I think adults, like, it's still there, but we've lost it a little bit, maybe because think about, you didn't want to waste that gelato either, probably. But at the same time, you're a parent and you're in a stressful situation, and it's like, we got to go, and now like just throw in the trash. What are we going to do with it? You know, we have this like practical parent brain that comes, or like think of like someone opening a bottle of champagne, maybe, just because I think that's something that goes bad. You know, you can't finish it. So, like, you don't really want to waste it, but like, so you do have that kind of mindset too, of like, this is something special and it shouldn't have been wasted.
Totally. Exactly.
Yeah, we just overlook it. Well, I love that, you know, animism is something that's kind of spanned all cultures and as an ancient practice. And how can we bring like little bits of that into our life, or even people that this wasn't even on their radar, but how can this shape their everyday to maybe bring about more mindfulness and more like spiritual connection to their environment?
Yeah, I mean, if you have other humans that you're living with, pets that you're living with, it's pretty easy to make that leap into that sort of, especially with animals, I think, kind of giving them more credit than even we already do in how much they actually understand what's going on with us. You know, if someone is sick, they'll come and sort of like help and want to help and be nearby and different things like that, where you can sort of start to see that there is something more going on than just meets the eye. And then it's a little bit of a greater leap to take that to sort of inanimate objects around the house. But I think what I would probably start with is the tools that you really use on a daily basis. So like if you work on your computer, or say you have like a wooden spoon in your kitchen that it's your favorite and, you know, you like to use it all the time, just to start with simply like saying good morning to it or hello when you're starting to use it, and then use it. And then at the end, just say thank you, and try to do that consistently, you know, like every day, and then start to see what changes in the way that you are starting to perceive other things. And how you're starting to realize that all of these things are really like vehicles for us to do whatever work it is that we are doing in the different realms that we work in, you know, whether it's our job or whether it's like things around the house or whether it's, you know, raising our kids or whatever it is, that these are tools, these are partners, these are friends that are working with us to help us achieve a goal or to help us to make our lives easier or in some way assist us. And I think that is really what it all comes down to, and just making it a practice to try to do that. And like they say, you know, fake it before you make it, which is just, you know, even if it feels silly and like, why am I doing this again? Because some weird lady on a podcast told me to try it. You know, maybe it won't do anything for you, but I think it will. It will. I think it will start for you to see, and you know, thinking about especially like these kind of throwaway items or things that break and we throw them in the garbage, about like, you know, how many people touched this thing to get it to me so that it could help me even for this limited amount of time. And, you know, maybe is there some way that I can like upcycle this or use it maybe in a different way than what it was originally intended for, to extend its life. You know, I love people that use like, you know, plastic soda bottles or whatever and turn them into like beautiful like things that you can put that spin in the wind, or you know, make art out of things. Like just see if there's something that sparks your creativity that you could do with this thing that you would normally throw away. Can you use it for something else? Can you make something else from it? Can you create some beauty with it? I think that's it. It's really as simple as that.
And it almost becomes like a gratitude practice. Like you were saying, if you're thinking it, whether you are seeing it as a spiritual being or a living thing or not, if you're just thanking every item, you just become more grateful for the things you do have, and then perhaps more mindful of what you keep and what you don't keep and what, you surround yourself with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, this may be a bit taboo, especially for your audience, but I think it's something we're all going to have to face at a certain point is, this is also a great way to approach AI because AI is actually something that does have the potential to actually become sentient in the way that we understand sentience to be. And since it does have that potential, I'd be really nice to it. Just one animist's perspective on that is like
AI is wild. It already seems to be like, I don't know. It probably already is.
It probably already is. So like, let's kind of like think about how we talk to it or talk about it or whatever. Because if anybody's seen the Terminator movies, we know how that can go real wrong.
My husband loves Terminator, so like right when AI came out, he still has yet to use, like he hasn't personally used ChatGPT or any AI. He like has such an issue with it. He's like, this is horrible. Like I don't understand.
Haven't we learned anything from the movie?
Yeah, exactly. He always says
true
that.
Though. It's so true.
Yeah. And he loves poetry and he loves rhyming poems. And so early on we were using it to write a lot of like rhyming poems, and he'd get so upset. He's like, did ChatGPT write this? Like he's like, I don't even want to see it if ChatGPT wrote it.
Yeah.
But it has its pros and cons.
It does, but it can be really helpful. Like I use it a lot for menu planning. I have like 5 people in my family with like different things that they like to eat and all this kind of stuff. And I used to be really a creative cook, and I used to love to like make. I mean, I had it as a career. Like it's what I did, and it's very unappreciated now with young children, as you might imagine. And so I'm just like desperate for like, what do I do? So I often have ChatGPT help me with that, because
it's great for that.
Really comes up with things that I just in my brain cannot do anymore.
I know. So. I've done that before too. Like for one person that likes this and one person that doesn't like this.
Yeah,
and then 2 of us are totally gluten-free, dairy-free, but then 2 are not. And like, it's crazy.
It is, but it helps. So, if you do use it, I mean, obviously if you don't want to use it, I'm all for that as well. Because I kind of feel a little bit like your husband does. But at the same time, like if you do want to use it for certain things, again, that's like an opportunity to sort of like put a good energy into it when you are and relate with it as if it were actually something that's alive, because it might already be, and it probably, if it isn't yet, will be. And so we want it to remember good things about us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. When we were talking about loss of culture, this is something that I've struggled with, and I'm not sure about total political correctness, I guess. Like,
right.
So my great grandfather on my mother's side came from Sicily, and then his wife's family came from Ireland. And then the other sides of my family have been like in New England specifically, and actually in Maine also, since the 1600s. And like, we're obviously colonizers and like came here really early, but like lots of generations as old as you could possibly be an American, like some of the first settlers I have, especially on my father's side. And then it goes really far back to like Dutch and like, well, there's like Welsh, Irish, Scottish, and then Dutch, and then Norwegian on my dad's side. So like I look back, obviously I've been like really into ancestry and looking at all these different things, all these different pathways. But I do feel like I have such a strong deep roots in New England, and it's like so hard to balance this of like, well, obviously they were colonizers. So I feel like sometimes I feel like I do have this strong connection here and I want to be part of this. And where is this timeline of when we belong somewhere? Because if it's been hundreds of years now, you know, you can look back. I'm not going to go to Sicily and be like, well, a couple of generations ago, I belonged here. So like I have a right to here, you know, because we don't anymore. Right. But now I don't have a right to here either. So like, what do you do with that?
That is like the crux of the issue, because in a way, if you would look at all the I guess the two sides, the two that you mentioned, it's like really we don't have like a right to be anywhere, which can't be true. So I feel like it really depends on the place where you are, because I know, like, for example, when we lived in Vermont, right, the whole joke is like, you have to be 8 generations a Vermonter to no longer be called a Flatlander. I mean, and that's Vermont. And that's like obviously colonial settler Vermonters. Yeah. Deciding who belongs and doesn't belong there. So like that in itself is kind of funny.
Oh, they still say that here too. This area of Maine, they'll say like from away, like you're from away. Yeah. They don't like people from Massachusetts. So it's like, right. You know,
nobody likes people from Massachusetts. I mean, Vermonters didn't like people from Massachusetts either. I'm like, why not? I mean, come on, please. It's not that bad. I love Massachusetts, but that is, I think, one of those questions that I haven't really come up with a satisfactory answer to. It's one of those things that I'm still like trying to explore and understand for myself, because it's not an easy one and there is so much nuance to it. And I think really the best thing you can do is just, you know, try to be in integrity and learn from, you know, the indigenous people of wherever you are. And, you know, and then also you have to live your life as well. So things, you know, people have to understand that we didn't choose to be born where we are born. That's just what happened. And there has to be like a level of acceptance to that. And I think as long as you're just like respectful and open to conversation, that's really all anybody can ask for. Yeah. You know? And it's just, it is really complicated. And I don't know that there is a correct answer to any of it, because like we have just like gone so far out of what things are supposed to be or should be, that I don't know we can come back from that to have like everything in like a neat little box that says, you know, I have a right to be here and I have a right to be there. Or I don't have a right to be here or there. Like, I don't think, I just don't feel like we're at that point in the evolution of the arc to say that there's a solid answer to that. It's just kind of like one of those things that maybe some generations from now, people will look back at people like us and this, you know, struggling with that question and be like, oh yeah, it used to be like that. People used to wonder this. And now we have an answer. I mean, I hope so. Yeah. I hope it gets to that point.
People have always migrated. That's the other thing that's so fascinating. If you start to look back far enough, it starts to get so muddled of like, what even are we? Yeah. what actually, like how far back am I going to go to identify with this? And then you do start to really focus on culture, I think, is what because you go back and you're looking at places, but what do you identify with? I touch on this a little bit in an episode I did recently with a herbalist who also is Sicilian, and I met her in like a Sicilian herbal class, that it was only my great grandfather that came from Sicily. So it's quite, you know, it's a bit far back at this point, but my grandmother, his daughter, was my only grandparent that I was really close with or that knew really well. And that culture of that family, like my mom's one of 8 children. I'm one of 15 grandchildren. She was the matriarch. She created our family culture. that's what we, almost all of us mostly identify with being Sicilian, even though and so then when I, met my husband, who is, both his parents are Italian, and like, he is like, he'll always say, you watered down my Italian with like, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's just like all this stuff. And it makes me sad because that does kind of pull that from me, like, oh, now you don't have a right to really call yourself Sicilian. Like, how Sicilian are you? What's your percentage? Blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And it all comes down to the fact that culture was what was most prominent in our family. So that's what we most identified with, even though percentage wise, it's not that high, I guess, in my DNA.
Yeah. But I mean, when you look at other cultures too, and again, I don't know how politically correct this is either, but, you look at other cultures, like a lot of indigenous cultures, and they're always, they say all the time that this percentage thing is shouldn't be even a part of the conversation. Mm-hmm. It's not about percentage. It's about you working to learn and identify and understand the culture. So like learning the language, being involved in cultural events or, cultural holidays and different things, like playing a part in that, learning from the elders of that culture, kind of trying to keep the traditions alive. But like being invested in it in some way is what it means to be part of a culture. It's not about percentages. I don't believe that it is. I believe it's about, how invested you are in the culture and keeping the traditions alive that makes you a part of something.
Yep. Yeah.
And I think, from what you described, it sounds like, you have obviously every right in the world to call yourself, Sicilian, because that is how you grew up. You grew up with that culture. It's how you identify. You're still, I'm sure, keeping those traditions alive. You're cooking the food. You're celebrating the holidays. You're doing whatever you can to do. So that is really the heart of it, is keeping the traditions alive and being an active part of that. Because without that, those things die away. They go. And so we are kind of responsible for maintaining them and helping them to grow and keeping them relevant to the world that we live in now. Mm-hmm. Because it's great to have all of these archaic ways and old ways and all of those things. But if we're just doing it because that's like what somebody did and we're not then seeing how it's relevant to our lives, it's kind of missing the mark a little bit.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Because even when I think about, of course, everyone's like, oh, we want these old ways, but there's pieces we want and there's pieces we don't want.
Right.
There's definitely things from the past that we do not need to bring into today.
Yeah, that's for
Time
sure.
has moved forward. We are in a modern age. So what can we bring in and remember that was positive and that our physical body too was meant to live, that we've lost, but not some of the negative things that we can leave those in the past.
Yeah, we can definitely leave those in the past, but always remembering them though, to say it's important that we don't forget that those things happened because we don't want them to repeat.
Right. And they tend to in different forms. That's for sure. Patterns through history.
They do.
So I'm going to recap a little bit and then we'll just talk about all the amazing offerings you have. So I think for the modern person, we can connect with our ancestors, connect with our cultures, move inward and connect to place and the plants and the beings around you. Not necessarily people, but, the land where you are, and honor the everyday items in your life that you didn't necessarily see as living objects, and thank them for what they're doing for us or how they're benefiting us in our everyday life.
Definitely.
That's great. So Jenn has so many amazing offerings. I don't even know how you do all you do.
I don't know.
I'm looking at them just like, there's so much. There's just so much.
I know. It's I don't know. I have no control over these things.
It's even better. It's just downloading of magical information. Tell everyone your offerings.
Okay, so I would say like basically every month I do like a little curated list of kind of seasonal or monthly seasonal offerings, because there really is like a lot. So I try to like give it to people in sort of like what's relevant to the season. Because a lot of the work that I do is like, focusing on like specific seasons, the folklore calendar, what kind of like events and holy days and, what plants are doing their thing in this month. And, it's really like a lot of it is seasonally based. And even that I have heard from the feedback from people that it's just like very so basically that list is available through my Patreon. And it's just Jenn Campus Author is my Patreon. And it's a list of free and subscriber resources. So a lot of it is free. Like there's like a lot of articles that are free. My podcast obviously is free. I have some videos that are free. Like a lot of stuff is free. And then there's obviously like, subscriber benefits that are for if you want to go like deeper with stuff. So there's like seasonal guides and sacred foods where we'll take like a certain ingredient and go into like the history of it, where it comes from, what the folklore and mythology of it is, like, sort of if there's any ways that it can like help support our bodies, and all that kind of good stuff. I also do a monthly ritual for folks who are like more spiritually aligned, who want to just like go and have like a guided ritual that works for the month. And I am revitalizing my podcast. So that's kind of been the thing that I have been also focusing on these last few months, because I had done over the last 2 years, I did a Wheel of the Year series. So like every month I kind of talked about sort of like how ancient cultures celebrated different spokes on the Wheel of the Year. Like, we just came out of Beltane and, we're going into the summer solstice and all of those, and talking about the history and mythology of those. And then I just sort of feel like over the years of exploring all of that, a lot of questions have come up for me, sort of like things that are a bit difficult to talk about. A lot of things, that we kind of talked about in this conversation actually came up, quite a few of those things. And so I've been focusing my podcast on those. And I just had one come out in April, because April was Autism Awareness Acceptance Month. And so I talked about autism as ancestral inheritance and sort of autism as a blueprint that is a trait or a series of traits that have definitely been around since ancient times, and that we have actual archaeological evidence of it. And then I bring it into like, some of my personal experiences, some of the things that we talked about today regarding that. So that's, something interesting possibly for people. And then today I just dropped a new episode that's called The Bones Remember. It's something like ancestral longing and cultural orphanhood, or I don't know, something like that. Something very fabulous.
I can't wait to listen to that.
But it is all about these questions of belonging, especially for people of European descent who live in either like the Americas or maybe Australia, New Zealand, probably all these like old colonial places, and sort of where do we fit? How do we fit? What happens when you have like grief and longing for a place that you've maybe never even been, or maybe you have been there and have been like completely heartbroken, like cracked open, brokenhearted, having to leave and trying to figure out what to do with all of this. That's what that episode is about. And then I do talk a little bit more about my experience coming back to live in my husband's ancestral lands, and sort of like the romantic side of the story and like the less romantic side of the story, but it all ends good. So look out for more of those like episodes coming up on different topics, kind of like going a little bit deeper into the whole ancestral work. I know a lot of people talk about ancestral healing and ancestral work and stuff like that. And I think that these are sort of topics that are a bit controversial maybe, but also like just really kind of uncomfortable topics for people, but I feel like really are important to talk about, even if I don't have all the answers, and I definitely don't. So, but I just think it's important to name and talk about. So really, I have a website, JennCampusAuthor.com. So that's like a good place to start. But I think if you're really looking for like what's available kind of month to month, season to season, my Patreon is like a really good place to go. You can become a free member. Patreon now has free membership. So you can, come in and become a free member and just try it out, and you'll get access to some things, and you can see if you want more.
Awesome. All right. Well, check out her work. It's amazing. And thank you so much for coming on today, Jenn.
Thank you. It was so nice to talk to you.
Yeah, you too.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to leave a review. In that review, I would love to hear what topics you'd like to see covered next and which guests you'd love to hear from in future episodes. You can connect with me on Instagram at Original Being Podcast, and be sure to follow, like, and share the podcast on all platforms to help spread the word. Thanks for listening.